Now, fantasy magic is entertainment. It's illusions for fun. It's fun and games. But magic rituals, as we look at them, are dead serious, with serious results, including killing other people. Magic is an illusion. It has no verification. So you don't look at Penn and Teller's act and say, somebody verify to me that that's real or not. We know it's not real. Whereas when you're looking at a magic ritual, you can say, well, did the guy die or not? Did the woman fall in love with me or not? Did the two people who love each other become hateful? Did that happen or not? There's a question of verifiability, but there's no verifiability. Is it effective as an illusion or not? So I would argue that, in fact, stage magic is using ritual events in certain ways, but they make no real change in the world. Real magic, on the other hand, I found this great picture of someone offering liquor to, that's Batuk Bhairava, the young Bhairava. This is probably in Benares, in India, and he's often made worships in magic manners. He's one of the most common deities who comes up in the magic rituals I study. So what is real magic? We're going to take a look at a book called Real Magic by a guy named Dean Radin, not Dan Radin. And real magic, he argues, is when the powers of the mind, the psychic powers or mental powers, affect the world. That's not what I'm getting at here. We'll get into what he's talking about there, doing something different. What we're looking here is for rituals that cause pragmatic changes in the world. Rituals that people actually do, not they just think about, or not that they perform in an act in a show or in a movie. Stuff people actually do, real magic. They apply religious contents explicitly. Deities, candles, peacocks, marigolds. These are common offerings in Hindu worship. But then suddenly adding booze, and then suddenly going further and adding other intricate ingredients that will cause a pragmatic change in the world. Pragmatic ritual technologies. Whereas illusionary magic and fantasy magic is described in books. You can get how-to books on how to do stage magic and close magic. The magic rituals we're talking about are recorded in grimoires. Now, I use grimoire widely. It's from the French word grammaire, and a grimoire is any book that sets out these sort of real magic spells. Arguably, I look at ones that are pragmatic ritual technologies. There could be other ones that are more sort of like high magic. We'll get into that distinction between high and low magic even more over time. But yeah, they're recorded in these funky little books that I have a ton of. Look at this one. Yeah, that guy's using his Vashikarana, which we'll learn about in a little bit. So these are ritual events. You do a ritual and it makes a real change in the world. Fantasy magic gives you an illusion, gives you an image. Real magic is supposed to make a concrete change in the world. And it's subject to verification. Did it work or didn't it? But the thing about fantasy magic and real magic is you can't really split them. Real magic and fantasy magic are united in the same sort of fantastic discourse. Sure, both have an element of an illusion. The sorcerer is doing, the little ritual to make people hate each other, but he has to make his client feel like it works. Or even confuse himself and make himself feel that it works. So how do you make an audience or client believe that a ritual or event is effective? In fantasy magic, it happens. The illusion is effective or not. Are they convinced that something happened or not? Do they react to it or not? Illusory magic sort of leans on the fantasies of magic. So what we'll often see is that, and if you look over here, and I'll talk about this more in a second, a lot of the early magicians would wear turbans. They would, and sometimes they would dress in Indian clothes, and they would say that they were fakirs, which are sort of mystic, ascetic, holy men, or even swamis. So there's a notion that India is the land of magic. And if you look at like old magic sort of performances in like the 20th century, especially in India, you'll see Westerners dressed in like a business, like a formal tuxedo, and a turban, and they'll have some name like Yogi Fakir. So the idea of magic and real magic is always found within stage magic. Stage magicians, by and large, are skeptics. They perform magic. They know magic isn't real. They like debunking magic. When you talk to people, as I've talked to professional magicians about the magic I study, they're like, that's fascinating. It's also bullshit. There's no denying the fact that Penn and Teller, who I talked about a little bit, had a TV show for many seasons called Bullshit, where they just debunked things, which was kind of good. So the thing is, a stage magician is a skeptic. He's an honest liar. He's telling you he's going to lie to you, and then he lies to you, and then he makes the illusion. However, a sorcerer who's a skeptic is in bad faith. If I don't believe that the magic ritual I'm performing for you, or that I'm telling you to perform works, then I'm in bad faith. I'm lying to you in a really uncool way. So magic in South Asia. So like I was saying, stage magicians often stated that their art comes from the East, often India. They would wear turbans and say that they are fakirs. They would be fake Indians. I mean, for this, you got to remember that since the 1600s, the British occupied India from 1600 to 1947. Arguably, we can work with the timeline. But for them, India was the land of the magic, of the weird, of the strange. And we look over here and we see Sorkor. Sorkor was actually an Indian who was performing illusionary magic. There's a great documentation of him and the history of magic in this book by Lee Siegel from 1991. It's a wonderful book called The Net of Magic. It's beautifully written. Lee himself is a professional magician. Yeah, he does stage magic and whatnot. And I've been at academic conferences and watched him do sleight of hand while he's kind of delivering a lecture. I find him really enjoyable. But look down at this Sorkor here. See this word here, Indrajal, up under the left? Indrajal means the net of Indra, the net of the god Indra, and is one of the oldest terms for Indian sleight of hand magic, but it also overlaps into some aspects of sorcery. We'll get into that more later. All right, so the last thing I want to talk to you about is the rope trick. So Siegel went to write this book, The Net of Magic, and he goes to India and he's like hanging out for a while, and he meets professional magicians and he's doing magic with them, and they're all learning and doing stuff and kind of sharing because he's a professional magician. And he keeps hearing about this thing called the Indian rope trick, which is probably one of the most famous illusions of all time. In the Indian rope trick, as it's described, a magician comes forth with his apprentice. He opens up a basket and he makes, through his magic prestidigitation, a piece of rope climb up into the sky so high that no one can see. He says to his disciple, go on up there, climb on up. So the disciple climbs on up, and then he says, come on down, come on down. Disciple doesn't come down, assistant doesn't come down, and this is kind of gruesome. Doesn't come down. And then the magician gets all angry. So he puts a knife in his teeth and he climbs up himself. And as everyone is waiting and looking up, not knowing what's going on, down drop the arms, boom, boom, the legs, boom, boom, the head, boom, boom, the body, boom, boom, of the assistant. It's gruesome. It's terrifying. There's always a certain horror to magic. Magician climbs back down, muttering and picks up all the parts of the body, puts it in a basket, says a magic mantra, and then boom, the magician's assistant pops out of the basket, unharmed and in whole. The Indian rope trick. Siegel reads through newspaper stories. He talks to every professional magician he can when he was there in the 1990s. He meets all these really interesting street magicians and actually learns the street magic that they're doing, which is predominantly done by Muslims, in fact, up there. And eventually he comes to an astounding conclusion. The Indian rope trick has never been performed. People do little parts of it, but the thing in whole has never been done. We don't have photos of it. I mean, photography hasn't always been around. We have descriptions of it, but the descriptions are usually by somebody who heard the story from somebody else. Very few direct claims to have actually seen it. So Siegel comes to the conclusion that the net of magic, Indrajal, in fact, is not the net of magic is magic in India. That's a whole other thing. So what he comes to the conclusion of is that it was never done, that it's always been a story talked about by magicians and people, but it's never actually been performed. And then he writes a wonderful speculative piece, this is where he sometimes lapses into fiction in his work, about what it would look like if someone did try to fake it. And he's got this magician trying to figure out how to have like a floating kid made out of helium that he could pull apart, and then he'd misdirect them so the kid was in the and it comes to some interesting conclusions. It's fun to think about. But this Indian rope trick, he argues, has never occurred in reality. But parts of it, like having a kid climb up a rope that stands on its own, that's done. We got photos of it all over the place, but not the whole shebang with the resurrection. Okay, so what's our take?